All right, welcome everyone to this week's edition of Real Talk the Pendulum. My name is Dr. Serena. I am your co-host of this podcast. And this week I am going to be talking about depression and seasonal affective disorder. And there's a few different reasons for this because now that we're like in mid-October, uh, right around like mid-fall and early fall, mid-fall, and early winter, a lot of people start noticing these different symptoms that start coming on about depression, and seasonal affective disorder starts to increase for a lot of people. So I wanted to take one of these podcasts and talk a little bit about these symptoms and a little bit about what this condition is. It is a clinical disorder as well. It does fit under the depression diagnoses in the Western DSM. And so, recognizing what this looks like and understanding it, and that there are treatable methods for it too, because it is a condition that a lot of people experience and may not really even know that they experience it. So we're going to talk a little bit about what it is, what depression looks like, what is seasonal affective disorder, some statistics, a little bit about what contributes to this and what influences it, and reasons that it tends to exacerbate in seasonal affective disorder for some people, more so during winter months than during other times of the year. And then different ways that can help in managing it and also treating it and decreasing some of the symptoms of it. Hi, Lori, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank
Thanks.
you. All right, so here are just kind of some information about uh, depression and seasonal affective disorder around. There's a lot of myths about depression that exist. And, as I was doing some research and just for my own clinical work, working with clients that, experience depression, there is like this kind of myth about, oh, this is an excuse that you just don't want to do something. It's a way of feeling lazy, or it's something that you're doing to yourself, or that you're not really seeing all the good things that you have in your life. And, I actually have heard people, say this, like, I have all these good things are happening and I don't know why I'm feeling this way. And it's not something that you like, this is something that is happening in the brain. And so I think that's important to recognize too, that this is not something that you are not um, willing. This is not about willpower. Like you can't will this away. And it's not something that goes away by like ignoring it either. This is not about, being moody. That's another myth that tends to come up with depression and seasonal affective disorder as well, that this is kind of like like, oh, this is like attributed to a hormonal thing or something like that. This is not about that either. This is something all in your head. These are all different myths that exist, and are very common too. They're very pervasive in the stigma around depression and seasonal affective disorder. And so, the facts really are about depression and seasonal affective disorder is that people do experience various shades of feeling low. I mean, just as part of the experience of life is that we all go through different shades of feeling blue. And a lot of that is, circumstantial. A lot of it relates to our genetics. A lot of it relates to circumstances, things that are going on in our environment, foods that we eat, the amount of exercise that we get, physical activity, what we're doing in our work. Stress is really a factor too. Things that are happening in the world. I mean, there's so many different things that contribute to this. Genetics also plays a factor in this too. And so some of the statistics that relate to this is that, on an annual basis, overall, about 15.5% will experience major depression. And major depression is episodic. So this is an episode of depression that's very severe, where it lasts for at least a period of time. And symptoms can vary for people, but it can be it can impair daily functioning, basically. And with seasonal affective disorder, in 2002, there was a study, and 4 out of 10 people experienced seasonal affective disorder in 2002. So approximately 5% of the population, and this is in the United States, experience this annually. Women are more affected by seasonal affective disorder, and the onset is usually 18 and over, so more young adult and over. There are some studies that are showing that this is happening more in children and adolescents too. And I don't know, I could not find some of this research. I don't know if that's associated with some of the things that were happening from the pandemic or not. With all that isolation that was happening and with the lack of sunlight and the lack of being outside, because there is some connection with that from the research. But to recognize that this is something that is something to pay attention to. I mean, I'm not saying that not paying attention to it, but just something to pay attention to. So in the DSM, this is the handbook, the medical model. This is a medical model, really looking at kind of the different types of depression that exist in Western culture, in North America, in the United States. And we have your major depressive disorder, dysthymia, which is kind of like a low grade depression. So it's like this milder form of depression that exists. And so it could be uh, like a low grade depression. Then you have more of this mild, moderate, and severe depression that may occur with and without psychosis. You have your seasonal affective disorder, and then you have your postpartum depression. And so the different kind of symptoms that people may experience, and this varies person to person. But the main kinds of symptoms, in different intensities, different duration, different frequency, and those are really key, is that people might experience the intensity of a symptom differently. And it may, like one symptom may last longer or shorter than another symptom, or one symptom may end and then another one may take over. So it really varies person to person. But in general, the idea is that people experience these symptoms for at least 2 weeks at a time, and they impact their life within that time frame. And so when there is this experience where these symptoms are persistent for a period of 2 weeks, and it impacts their life, that is when, a person does want to go to a healthcare provider, a mental health professional, to get and to talk about what's going on. Because, whether or not it's circumstantial or it's cultural or environmental or genetic or whatever is happening, if it's impacting a person's ability to function and do their day-to-day activities, the idea is you want to figure out what's happening and being able to get some help with that. And that's what depression and seasonal affective disorder do. So seasonal affective disorder, I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But so these are some of the symptoms that, come up for people. One is like this experience of feeling sluggish, like you just, this kind of like like slowness. I think of like a sloth. I mean, not saying that that's wrong, because a sloth is a sloth and, that's their characteristic. But for human beings, it's a little bit different. There's this sense of feeling fatigue. Hi, Cheryl, by the way, how are you?
Good, thanks.
There is a sense of fatigue and low energy. People may feel unmotivated, like they just lack this sense of feeling motivation. There is a decrease in interest in pleasure. Oh, I was supposed to say pleasure. I don't, it got cut off there a little bit. There are changes in sleep patterns. So oftentimes with depression, people may find themselves sleeping more. And it's also not uncommon for some people to have interrupted sleep, like insomnia, where people might have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep or getting up. People might notice that they cannot sleep, and so that may increase their irritability. Or they might be more reactive because when we don't have good sleep, that does contribute to being more reactive. People have changes in appetite. A lot of people with depression may notice that they don't have any appetite, or they may have more cravings for, especially with seasonal affective disorder, more cravings for carbohydrates. And so they find themselves eating more carbohydrate type foods, especially like in winter. And so that's part of that. There might be an increase in feelings of guilt, thoughts of shame, thoughts of worthlessness, and then suicidal thoughts and suicidal actions. And that could be attempts, or that could be planning for it too, as well. So those are the different types of symptoms that exist with depression, and also are present with seasonal affective disorder as well. And so again, when these symptoms are present for an individual, we look at the intensity of the symptoms, we look at the frequency of the symptoms, and we look at the duration of the symptoms collectively. And this is not meant like to, diagnose yourself or anything. I mean, again, you go to a mental health professional to get some assistance and to get because they do a full assessment and take into account everything that's going on, and also monitor that too. And so with seasonal affective disorder, these are symptoms that usually appear more so in late fall or early winter, and then they resolve themselves in the spring and summer. And so people will notice that, usually like around this time, they start noticing a difference, and maybe as fall progresses, their symptoms might get a little bit more intense, or they might start noticing more symptoms. And so it starts to get more progressively intense or more frequent or stay longer. And then I've heard, when clients are coming, they just don't know what's going on. And so seasonal affective disorder is common for individuals. I mean, there is one called summer too. There's one that people have in the summer. It's not as common as the one that's more winter depression, but there are individuals that do have what's known as summer depression. But because it's not as common, there's not as much research on it. So, but what we do know is that with hotter weather and with longer days, people have interrupted sleep, which tends to interrupt their different sleep patterns, their serotonin levels, and then the production of melatonin. And so that's what impacts how their seasonal affective disorder, manifests. So with the seasonal affective disorder in winter, what tends to be more common for individuals when they experience this, and again, it's going to look different for different individuals. And, to get a diagnosis of this, and I'm not saying like you need to have a diagnosis of this, but what I am saying is that, if you do notice that you're having some of these experiences where, wow, why am I all of a sudden just feeling so blah? I mean, it was interesting because even today I was having a conversation with somebody and I was like, I'm just feeling so tired. I don't know what's happening. And someone was like, oh, it's the weather. It's getting colder. And I'm like, of course, it's the weather. Yes, it's getting colder and the days are shorter. And I'm doing a podcast on this and I would know this information. But no, I did not even realize that until someone else said that to me. So again, sometimes we all need reminders. So the idea with this is recognizing that when people have seasonal affective disorder, it can last for about anywhere between 4 and 5 months, and then it resolves itself. And so people then go through this during the winter months. It may start somewhere around like Sometimes it can start in September, October. It gets worse like maybe around January, February, and then it starts to resolve itself maybe in March. And so during that period of time, when people start to recognize that this may be present for them, there are some things that can be done. And I'll talk about some ways that this is treatable. But there are some prevention ways too that people can look at in terms of how can I prevent this from being worse. It's not about necessarily preventing it from happening because that's an unknown factor. We don't know how that's going to look for you. And, we can only do so much in it. And nature, of course, does its own thing. And sometimes nature is a little bit more powerful. And that kind of sucks sometimes. It is what it is. So the idea is, though, being able to control what you can control. So there are a lot of things that influence the depression and seasonal affective disorder. And I think this is a really important point, too, because the idea is recognizing that there are so many different variables that impact the experience of depression and the experience of seasonal affective disorder. We know that genetics is connected with depression. We know that neurotransmitters, serotonin and melatonin, these are key factors in depression and seasonal affective disorder. We know that environment, these influence quite a bit. We know that the environment also plays a part. If you have a lot of things that are going on, it sometimes can be very depressing. And keep in mind, this doesn't mean it's a clinical disorder. It can mean that you are experiencing sadness over things that are happening. That doesn't make it a clinical disorder. Psychosocial factors, things that are going on in a person's life, how much support a person has, stigma, number 4 talks about this, other considerations. And just like kind of thoughts that are going through people's minds, what kinds of things people are thinking about, how people talk to themselves, how people are reinforcing different things. I've talked about all these different things, to some degree in different podcasts, but these are all different pieces that play a part in the experience of depression, and feeling, differently about things too. Now, when it comes to clinical, depression and the clinical seasonal affective disorder, there is going to be this kind of intensity that occurs, and also the duration and the frequency that is a little bit different. And so we do look at more of that intensity and the frequency because we want to be able to prevent it from becoming so impairing in a person's life. And so we look at mental health history, we look at what resources people have, support, lots of different support groups that are out there too. And just even community, what kind of community support exists for a person can be very helpful. There's a lot of stigma, when it comes to having depression, and I don't know if people have experienced that, when you feel blue, what is that saying? Misery loves company. I think that's like a fallacy because misery does not love company.
That's right.
I've never known that to be true. Like when nobody wanted to talk to me when I was miserable. So it was like, okay, I don't know what that's about, but so the idea is that when people are not feeling all that great, people tend to avoid that, and so it's like, how do you manage this, and how do you really do find someone to talk to? So there are lots of different resources, and I have some resources on my website, particularly for this podcast. There's going to be a screening link that I'm going to put up after the podcast. If people want to go to that, they can access that screening, and then also a resource list as well, if they're interested in finding some of those resources. But some of the sources for this information I listed there, and then also in the references. So again, there's the screening links. You can go to the episode 37 for the Pendulum podcast links, and that's where you'll find these different links. I just want to make sure that that is known if you're interested in that. So what are some things that you can do? That's going to be important to know. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of the research talks about, and then also what, from a holistic perspective, different things that people can do to help um, with this. And so one of the things, of course, is working with the brain. So we know that neurotransmitters are very important. And serotonin and melatonin are two of the things that really influence this. So what tends to happen is that, when daylight is shorter, right? The sun is not there as much as it used to be. People are not producing as much serotonin as they usually have during the summer months. And serotonin regulates mood. That's what it does in the brain. And so that's one of the reasons why the regulation of depression is different, because we don't have as much serotonin in our brain. And so medication can help with that. That's been very effective, being on an antidepressant. I'm not a medical doctor by any means, but I am just referencing what the research has demonstrated. And I know a lot of people are against medication too, and that's fine. They're all alternatives to that. I know many people that take medications in the short term, and then they go off of it with the advice of their doctor. When summer comes around, because they don't need it after that. I also know people that will talk with their doctor and their medical provider or their treatment team about different alternative, like medicine, complementary and alternative medicine, different ways that they can incorporate healing. So that's another option. Vitamin level assessment is another thing that can be done, and you can talk with your doctor about this too. This is the research indicates vitamin D levels are important. So sunlight provides the production of vitamin D in the body and in the skin. And so when there is a shortage of sunlight during the day, we produce less vitamin D. And so that's something that also helps produce serotonin. And so which is what helps regulate mood. And so there's recommendations based on the research about checking with the doctor to assess your vitamin D levels, in your blood. And so that's one other thing that can be done from a brain perspective. It's also important to rule out that the depression is not caused by other medical issues, because sometimes there is other medical issues that can cause this too. And so getting a medical assessment can be important. Having sunlight exposure, even just going outside when the sun is present and exposing yourself to the sun or sitting by a window can be helpful. Of course, being mindful of sun exposure, because of course that, can increase the risk of cancer. And so being mindful of that, but getting whatever kind of sun exposure that you can and protecting yourself at the same time is important. Another really effective approach that was in the research is light box therapy. So you can reach out to, there are practitioners that do this, or you could do some research on this. But what light box therapy is, according to the American Psychiatric Association, is that you sit in front of this light box, which is a bright, bright light. And it's a protective light. So it's not like exposing you to like sunlight rays where you can, get cancer or anything. And so you do this 20 minutes every day in the morning and when you wake up. And then the idea is that will help produce what you need for vitamin D. And so what the research suggests is that it's very effective for people that have done that, which I thought was interesting, because I've heard of it, but I've never done the research on it. So it was interesting to see that it's effective. Another thing that can be helpful is rewards. And so one of the things that exists in the behavioral health field is how rewards can release dopamine and also other types of neurotransmitters. And so when we pair different rewards with things that we want, that can be like a dopamine hit. And Again, right now we're in this kind of influx of dopamine, like we're in a dopamine world all of a sudden. And so people are trying to reduce that. But again, maybe during the winter months, when you are trying to not be in this kind of sluggish space, finding different ways to increase rewards or increase what feels good for you could look very different. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that is going to be harmful to you. Okay. Emotionally, okay, what is this? Oh, there we go. There's something that's called micro joy. And so one of the things that I talked about, like cultivating happiness a few podcasts ago. And one of the things that Gretchen Rubin had talked about in her book, what was it, The Happiness Project? She had talked about a couple things about like spending out, where she said, those things that you saved for that one special day, that like, I don't know, that favorite sweater that you're like, oh, I'm going to wear this when I don't know, um, go to that movie I've always wanted to go to, or when I graduate from school, or when I finished writing that book, or whatever the case may be. What she talks about is just go ahead and use it now because you're going to enjoy it. And why not just do it? So during the winter months, this might be the time where you just enjoy those things that you're putting off, and see how those things invite those micro joy moments. And so the more that you do of those, you are increasing those moments of joy that you can experience, and that gives you something to look forward to. A lot of research points to this kind of anticipation that tends to be more pleasurable than the actual experience. So, like when you plan something that you're looking forward to, it tends to be more exciting than the actual experience itself. And many of you may have experienced this, like when you're planning a trip that you're really looking forward to, like all the details that go into planning this trip. And then you're like thinking about all the stuff that you're going to be doing and what you're going to be looking at and where you're going. And then you go on the trip and then you're like, okay, that wasn't quite as what I thought it was going to be. But it was the anticipation of it that was much more exciting. And so those are like those micro joys that can be helpful. So planning things, rewarding yourself with those things can be what this is, because depression is about the lack of joy, basically. And from a chakra perspective and from a holistic stress perspective, this is where we lack joy. Depression is about that. And so building it, planning it into particularly the winter months is one way of kind of preventing that from increasing, the lack of that. With thoughts, we know that this is really about thought management. So posting positive thoughts around your space, bright images, having like bright yellow or inspirational quotes, bright colors, having pleasant sounds or pleasant music, things that really are just based on the five senses that can be rewarding or pleasurable. Sometimes, when we see images or when we hear sounds, they can cause a different vibration to increase in the body, and that can have a different impact on the brain as well. And then we have the heart chakra, which is about perception, but this is also about awareness. And so this can involve movement. I know like when people are feeling, low energy, and I mean, I felt this myself, as well. But movement actually can increase the desire to move, which is kind of a paradox when you think about that. It's like I have to move in order to feel like I want to move, right? So it's like, okay, but I don't feel like moving. But if I move, then I'll want to move. So it's like, okay, how do I get out of this catch-22, so to speak? But bodily sensations, sometimes just kind of focusing on the bodily sensations and going with what seems the most present can be helpful. Therapy is also something, cognitive behavioral therapy has been shown to be very effective with seasonal affective disorder and also depression. There are many different forms of cognitive behavioral therapy that have that are effective, and so those are different forms of therapy that can help, especially during the winter months. But in general, and I'm biased, of course, but I think therapy can just be helpful overall. So. Behavior and environment. So this is the throat chakra, and this is about communication, but this is also about looking at things that we do and what's in our environment. So getting outside whenever possible, developing a routine. And, routine can be very, very boring for people. And at the same time, it can also be something that helps when depression or kind of low energy hits, that you're not having to put a lot of um, thought into because you have a routine already in place. And so when something is already kind of present for you that, okay, I don't need to think too much about what I need to do because it's already there, you have this routine in place where maybe you go and maybe you do certain stretches, or you engage in journaling, or you make a nourishing meal, or just different things that are about self-care or about connecting with other people. When you involve those kind of things in your routine, especially during winter months, those are things that will be easier to do because they're already part of a routine that doesn't require you to think about putting them in place. Rewarding yourself. I use a lot of rewards apparently here, so just to be mindful of that. Finding support groups, that could also be like support groups in your community. That could be support groups according to your religious or spiritual beliefs, your cultural groups, those kinds of things. Connecting with others is really important. Setting up call dates with people, once a week, once a month, just to reach out to people, especially during winter months, can be very, very important. And just saying like, okay, once a month I'm going to call this person, or once a month having someone else call you. And so, or once a week. I mean, those are just the best ways to, or not best ways, but the most effective ways where you have this kind of plan where people are connecting with you and you are connecting with other people. Um, Avoiding isolating, because isolation is a huge part of depression and seasonal affective disorder. So making sure that people are checking in on you, or you're checking in on other people that may be isolating, is important, and that's part of community. And I also put down prevention planning because last week or 2 weeks ago I talked about prevention planning quite a bit. And that was in terms of the sugar sobriety. But prevention planning, all those things that I talked about, can also apply to depression and seasonal affective disorder, because when we talk about behavioral health, prevention planning works the same way in a lot of different formats across the board. Behavior is behavior, basically. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can apply some of the same concepts. And then the last one here is about the sixth chakra, which is the value spirit. I call this the slow and steady, as you're going through the winter months. Consulting trusted healing professionals, engaging in traditional arts, medicinal systems, engaging in somatics. This is like your body approaches, whatever that may look like, yoga, tai chi, those kinds of things. Expressive arts, engaging in like coloring. I love adult coloring for some reason. But painting, music, writing, things like that. But just something that really just resonates and connects with you, that may seem kind of mundane, but yet it's expressive and also is part of your own value system, and also part of allows you to be expressive from a spiritual space as well. So those are different ways that can help with depression and with seasonal affective disorder in the winter months. And again, like I said, if anybody has any, there will be some resources available on the website. But these are other resources that are available to you. Again, you can always call or text 988, which is a crisis line and a suicide line. There's SAMHSA's National Helpline, and then a bunch of other different websites. And one resource in particular that I really like that has a lot of different groups and all kinds of mental health and substance use groups for people is SAMHSA's Tip 65, which if you just type in a Google search or any search box, Tip 65 SAMHSA, you will have this peer recovery um, mutual, I think it's a mutual, well, it just says recovery support, something like that. But it includes so many different resources for individuals about mental health and substance use that you will find something in there to help. And that is what I have for you. Those are the references. So I'm curious if anybody has any questions. I know we're way over.
Just a very, very quick comment. I appreciate hearing about the summer seasonal affective disorder. I never knew about that before at all. Never heard of
Yeah.
it. So that was interesting to learn. So thank
Yeah.
you.
You're welcome. Absolutely.
I just have one quick comment. I am a big proponent of my full spectrum light. It has made a huge difference because I do suffer, I think, from seasonal affective disorder, especially living in Michigan in the winter months where we don't see a lot of sunshine. And it's just been so, so helpful. I do notice a big difference. So if
Oh,
anyone's interested in or considering purchasing.
great. That's good to
Yeah.
know that I did not know that. That's great to know
Yeah.
that it's effective.
Yeah, it's helped me.
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you both for being here. Thank you all for watching and have a great rest of your evening. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye,
you, Serena.
everyone.
Bye-bye.